Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and also welcome to those of you joining from over on my article on Forbes. And today we are finally welcoming AMD back to the world of high-end desktop graphics cards, because it is launching the RX 6800 XT and the RX 6800. So both these cards will be available today, and all us reviewers are basically getting our performance numbers and analysis out. So super exciting time for all you gamers out there. So RX 6800 XT then, as you can see here, donning the gorgeous EK water block, the Vector water block with RGB lighting and all that kind of stuff on there. Single slot as well, which is super cool. So thanks EK for sending that over. I'll be doing a separate article on water cooling this card and building a water cooled PC. So don't forget to check out that. And 6800 XT then is obviously the competitor for the RTX 3080. RTX 3080 is a little more expensive. You're looking at about $50 difference. So hopefully the AMD card will perform on par, which means that you'll be getting the same performance but for less cash, with a little thing called ray tracing thrown into the mix to make things a bit more complicated. So on this side then, we've got the RX 6800, which is the competitor for the RTX 3070. Now, I say competitor, this card is actually around $70 to $80 more expensive, I think, thereabouts. So kind of an interesting mix-up with these two cards. So the 6800 XT, slightly cheaper than the RTX 3080. The 6800, the RX 6800, slightly more, well, a fair bit more expensive when you consider the price. So obviously, we're going to be taking a look at all the performance numbers and analysis to see which one you should buy out of these two things, whether you've got around $500 to spend or whether you're, you've got more than $600 to spend. It's going to be an interesting discussion. So before then, though, don't forget to subscribe to my channel using the button below, and also don't forget to turn on notifications so you are notified when I upload a new video. Got lots of cool stuff coming up with more graphics card reviews, obviously water cooling stuff, and mini ITX features and testing and all that kind of stuff. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, and also like this video. It means a lot. So today then, we'll be looking at the performance numbers of these two graphics cards and just seeing how they compare against Nvidia, really. So this is AMD's first foray into high-end desktop graphics cards for quite a while. So obviously Nvidia has had a stolen 2-year march on AMD in terms of ray tracing and DLSS and all that kind of stuff. AMD obviously does have its own DLSS equivalent coming out soon. Not too much info on that, but obviously DLSS 2.0 is performing pretty well. I've just been looking at a lot of the reviews of that out there, and a lot of people in agreement that it does seem to work very well. You know, next to no image quality loss and that kind of thing. So, going to be a very interesting test. Not least of all because the price differences between these two cards. This one being a lot more expensive, this one being a bit cheaper than the AMD the Nvidia equivalents, of course. So, a bit about my test system. So we are using an Intel system. It's the Core i9-10900K, the same system that I used for the RTX 3000 series testing. That obviously means that there's no smart access memory involved in these benchmarks. It also means that there's no PCI Express 4.0 involved in these benchmarks as well. So obviously the latter would benefit both cards. The memory feature from AMD that we've revealed recently, it will benefit some games, but obviously there's only 24 hours in a day, and I haven't been able to rerun all my benchmarks with that new feature on these new cards. So obviously a lot of other reviewers out there will be in a similar boat. They've got performance numbers with Intel systems because we were testing the RTX 3000 stuff before Ryzen 5000 launched. So obviously if those people out there have got a little less sleep than I have, they might have some Ryzen 5000 numbers with smart access memory and that kind of thing out there as well. So definitely worth checking those reviews out to maybe sway your argument one way or another, and I'll be looking at that feature soon once I've actually caught up on some sleep. So what we'll be looking at today is these two cards versus a whole bunch of other Nvidia graphics cards. So we've got the RTX 3070, RTX 3080 and 3090 in the mix as well, plus the RTX 2080 Ti and 2080 for a bit of comparison, should you want to pick one of those up, either new or probably secondhand, I think, because I don't think prices have come down that much yet. And conclusions at the end as well. So let's move on to the performance numbers, and obviously don't forget to subscribe and like this video too. Okay, so starting off then, just a small selection of the mid-range cards, the 6800 and the 3070 at 1080p. And we've got a decent uplift over the RTX 3070 for the RX 6800. So you're seeing a 99th percentile minimum of 87 frames per second for the Nvidia card versus a much healthier 96 frames per second minimum on the RX 6800, and a similar gain in the average 99th percentile as well. And next up, we're going up to 1440p, and again, a little bit of an uplift over the RTX 3070, 71 frames per second minimum for the RTX card and 75 frames per second for the RX 6800. But generally, I think you probably go for the RTX 3070 here. It's about $70 cheaper, so you're not really getting $70 worth of extra performance here, although the RX 6800 does outperform the RTX 2080 Ti, which is a great result. Now switching over to the high-end cards, and we've got the RX 6800 XT and RTX 3080 highlighted in the graph now, and very, very good performance on the minimum 99th percentile for the AMD card, 3 or 4 frames per second ahead of the RTX 3080, which is a good result, but the RTX 3080 is slightly ahead on the average 99th percentile. So really, it's kind of an even Steven thing here. It's faster average on the RTX 3080 and faster minimum on the RX 6800 XT. Stepping up to 4K now then, and in Borderlands 3 we are looking at pretty much an even result here for the RX 6800 and RTX 3070. So bit of a surprise result here. We are looking at the RTX 3070 picking up the crown because it obviously costs a lot less and you're getting the same performance. So not a great result for AMD in this benchmark, and you have to step up to the RX 6800 XT to get significantly more performance. Switching to the high-end cards now then, and we've got the Nvidia RTX 3080 and 6800 XT highlighted, and it's a bit of a win for the RTX 3080 here as well, because it offers a higher frame rate both on average and minimum than the Radeon RX 6800 XT, so around 9 frames per second on the minimum and pretty much the same on the average frame rate, so kind of a win for Nvidia here, just as it was at 1440p as well. So moving on to Far Cry New Dawn, and at 1080p, it's again it's the Nvidia RTX 3070, which seems to be the faster card, which is a bit of a shame given the RX 6800 actually costs more. You're looking at an extra 8 frames per second or so on the 99th percentile, and about 5 frames per second higher on the average frame rate too. Stepping up to 1440p though, and the extra grunt provided by the RX 6800 does start to have an impact, possibly the extra video memory, and we're looking at a minimum 99th percentile of 100 frames per second versus 96 frames per second for the RTX 3070. So RX 6800 doing better, but not really justifying the extra outlay here. Okay, so stepping up to the high-end cards now in Far Cry New Dawn and at 1440p. The RTX 3080 does have a bit of an advantage here, but I think it's kind of within line of the fact that the RX 6800 XT is about $50 cheaper. I think the performance here is pretty much looking at is pretty much in line with that price difference. So 103 frames per second on the minimum for the RX 6800 XT and 113 for the Nvidia card, with a similar difference in the average frame rates as well. Stepping up to 4K now then in Far Cry New Dawn, and the RX 6800 takes a commanding lead with a minimum of 76 frames per second versus just 63 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile for the RTX 3070. So at last kind of showing its might in this test with the extra video memory and other clout obviously having a big impact, and the average frame rate rising from 81 to 94 as well. So finally for Far Cry, we've got the 4K results with the high-end cards highlighted, the 6800 XT, and Actually, pretty much even Stevens here. There's 1 frames per second difference on the minimum 99th percentile and just 4 frames per second difference on the average. So given that the AMD card costs around $50 less, this is a win for AMD here. So at last, the 6800 XT seems to be sort of pulling its weight. It's going to be quite a bit of variation in games, I think, but at least here at 4K in Far Cry, you're looking at pretty much identical performance, and the GPUs are scaling up the graph as well. So starting off with Metro Exodus then, and 1080p with hairworks off but ray tracing and everything else enabled. The two cards are actually level pegging pretty much. The RX 6800 is a fair way behind on the average frame rate, but both managed a minimum 99th percentile of 49 frames per second. With ray tracing disabled and upping the ante up to 1440p, the RX 6800 takes a commanding lead at 55 frames per second minimum 99th percentile, and the RTX 3070 at just 47. However, the average frame rate remained within about 5 or 7 frames per second. So overall, I guess you probably opt for the RTX 6800 here. Just the extra $70 does net you a fair bit more performance. However, if you turn on DLSS and ray tracing, that starts to make a bit more of a difference here. So we are looking at 40 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile versus 40 for the AMD card, and 75 on the average versus 60 for the RX 6800. So definitely an advantage Nvidia's DLSS where and when you can actually enable it. Okay, so moving on to the high-end cards now then, which are now highlighted, and with RTX and DLSS enabled at 1440p, we're looking at a sizable advantage again for Nvidia with the RTX 3080 versus the RX 6800 XT. So you're looking at 59 frames per second minimum versus 43 frames per second minimum for the RX 6800 XT. So again, where you can use DLSS, it is going to make a significant difference when all the eye candy is enabled. Now we're looking at the high-end cards with ray tracing disabled, and the RTX 3080 still has a little bit of a lead on the average frame rate, but the minimum 99th percentile then for the RX 6800 XT probably means that if the two cards were equal in price, you'd probably opt for it anyway. But given the advantage here, I think AMD just manages to swing things in its favour, but obviously this is with ray tracing and DLSS disabled. Okay, so moving on to Shadow of the Tomb Raider now, which is obviously riddled with lots of DLSS and ray tracing options in the graphics settings. Here though, 1080p with all of that disabled, and it's a big win for AMD. You've got the RX 6800 managing a sizable minimum frame rate advantage of 129 versus 113 for the RTX 3070. So a big win and ultimately justifying its price tag here. Stepping up to 1440p then, and we are looking at another big win for AMD here. So 99 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile versus 81 frames per second for the RTX 3070, and also the RX 6800 is noticeably quicker than the RTX 2080 Ti as well. So stepping up to 4K now then, sticking with the mid-range cards, and we are looking at another win for AMD here. The RX 6800 betters the RTX 3070 by around 4 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile, a bit more on the average. So overall here, not really justifying the extra outlay for the RX 6800, given the fact that you have to spend around $70 more. I think you'd probably go for the RTX 3070 on this occasion. Now moving up to 4K, but with DLSS and ray tracing enabled, and obviously fairly unsurprisingly, you've got the RTX 3070 well ahead. DLSS really making the most of the extra performance, and you've got a minimum 99th percentile of 40 frames per second versus 25 frames per second here, and sizable advantage on the average frame rate as well, 51 frames per second versus 39 frames per second. So stepping up to the high-end cards now with the 6800 XT and RTX 3080 highlighted, and we're looking at a slightly higher average frame rate for the RX 6800 XT, but a slightly higher minimum 99th percentile for the RTX 3080. So kind of a mashup here. You'd maybe go for the RTX 3080 just thanks to that higher minimum 99th percentile, but overall though, the RTX 6800 XT does cost $50 more, so here I would probably opt for the RX 6800 XT at a push, I think. So moving up to 4K, again with DLSS and ray tracing enabled, and we are looking at a very significant win for Nvidia here, the RTX 3080, essentially doubling the frame rates of the RX 6800 XT. So where DLSS can come into play, it is a bit of a thorn in AMD's side. Hopefully it will be able to get its equivalent or something like it out soon, because Nvidia does have a bit of a weapon on its hands here. And finally, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we're at 4K, but with RTX features and ray tracing and DLSS all turned off. And once again, we're looking at a slight lead for the Nvidia RTX 3080, 70 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile versus 64 frames per second for the RX 6800 XT. So pretty much in line with the price difference, I think you would probably agree, between the two graphics cards. So Wolfenstein Youngblood then, and at 1080p, focusing on the lower end of the stack at the moment, and we've got a minimum 99th percentile of 256 frames per second, so pretty big frame rates here. Big lead for the RX 6800 as well over the RTX 3070, adding around 20 or so frames per second on the minimum, and about the same on the average frame rate as well. Generally, I think that's probably justifying its price tag there. If you were just playing this game at these settings, you would probably opt for the AMD card over the Nvidia one. Stepping up to 1440p now, and we are looking at another win for the RX 6800, so 182 frames per second versus 165, and sizable gains on the average frame rate as well. Now stepping up to 1440p, but with the high-end cards now then, the RX 6800 XT and 3800, and we're looking at a pretty even matchup actually for the two cards. So a win here for AMD, given that the 6800 XT costs less. 213 frames per second minimum versus 217, and just a few frames in it on the average frame rate as well. So obviously no RTX features, ray tracing, DLSS enabled in this game. So moving up to 4K, but sticking with the mid-range cards now then, and we are looking at the RX 6800, offering a sizable advantage over the RTX 3070 here. So ray tracing and all that malarkey turned off, just dealing with normal rasterization here, and AMD clear winner, generally justifying its price tag and price premium over the RTX 3070. Finally then, moving up to 4K, but focusing on the high-end cards this time, the RX 6800 XT didn't quite manage to match the RTX 3080 in this test. Given that the latter costs around $50 more, I think you would be tempted to opt for it. I think you're looking at an extra 10 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile, and a little more than that on the average frame rate. So I'd call this one just about a win for Nvidia in this case. So our final graphs then look at the power consumption, and the peak power draw for the Nvidia RTX 3070 sat at around 340 watts versus 370 watts for the AMD RX 6800, but then the latter does have more memory. It's a more powerful graphics card outside of ray tracing and all that kind of stuff, obviously. But if you're concerned about your power consumption and you want to keep things below 350 watts, don't know why you want to do that really, but if you want the lowest power, then the RTX 3070 does draw the least out of the two. So moving on to the high-end cards though, and it's the other way around. The RTX 3080 draws significantly more power at 481 watts than the Radeon RX 6800 XT, about 50 watts or so less. So kind of tit for tat really in terms of the power consumption. So today is perhaps just as much about AMD re-entering the high-end graphics card market. with its brand new high-end RDNA 2 architecture, its first high-end architecture for some time, as it is about the direct comparisons between the cards launched today and their RTX series counterparts. However, in terms of direct comparisons in rasterization, AMD is easily on par with the RTX 3000 series and matches or betters it on price points too, especially with certain instances such as the RX 6800 at 4K that definitely outperforms the RTX 3070 in a lot of situations, and the 6800 XT is cheaper and very often just as powerful as the RTX 3080. However, there is the issue of ray tracing, DLSS, and in general the march that Nvidia has stolen on AMD, given the fact that it's been dealing with ray tracing and boosting frame rates at these ultra high eye candy settings for the last 2 years. DLSS does offer a significant performance advantage when you dial up the settings and resolutions, and that is something that AMD can't counter at the moment. The benefits for a more well-rounded Nvidia card are very, very clear. So it depends really on what your priorities are in terms of gaming, which games you'll be playing, whether ray tracing and DLSS are supported, and whether or not you just generally favour AMD over Nvidia. The graphics cards launched today look great, they run very cool, they're very quiet, and they're very attractive. So I have no qualms about recommending either of them if they suit your own personal situation. So well done AMD, welcome back to the world of high-end graphics cards, and thanks everybody for watching.